town.
Hello, everyone. We are live, everybody. We are experiencing some technical difficulties today with our sound, and it may be with the comments. I don't know. We've been watching StreamYard all week, so the application that we use to broadcast. So we are going to be working with the sound issues in the background. But anyway, welcome to another episode of The Glass Table. Today we are actually talking about a very serious subject. We're honoring Mental Health Awareness Month, and we're honoring it with one of our episodes today. And you're going to hear from us today. And we actually wanted to show you what you got to look forward to on the stream today. In our first segment, we're going to honor Mental Health Awareness Month by telling our stories around the glass table. In our next segment, we will review information, including clips, to talk about the mental health crisis in the Jehovah's Witness organization. And then our last segment, we have something special for you guys. We will be interviewing the ex-Jehovah's Witness activist. Her name is Angela Ola. And then we will be taking as questions from you, as always, from our audience. And comments if you have, any comments. So we are looking forward to a great stream. To begin, why don't we go around the glass table and start speaking about what mental health awareness, I guess, means to us, and maybe share some of our experiences. So let's start with Emma. You want to go first?
Okay. Well, I have acute anxiety, badly. I didn't even realise what it was for years, and it wasn't until I went to ages ago now, years ago, a job centre interview, and just trying to get there, I just kept feeling migraines, dizziness, feeling sick, bad stomach, and I literally couldn't get to the interviews, and I had to keep cancelling the interview. And then when I finally got there, I spoke to the interview woman, and she said to me, "Have you been to your doctors about anxiety?" And I was like, "Anxiety? What's that?" And she was like, "Well, you've blatantly got anxiety." Because I was almost going to ask her, like, "Can I have a waste paper bin?" Because I was literally felt like I was going to throw up just sat there. So I was like, okay. She's like, right, go book an appointment with your doctor. So I went to my doctor and spoke about anxiety. And I was like, wow, okay. So then I started to think about when it had started, and I didn't associate with it. But years ago, when I was a JW, I think I was about 19, 20, because I didn't do any talks for about the last 2 years I was there. And I remember I'd prepped this talk, and I'd got all my notes stuck in your Bible, and as you do. And then about 5-10 minutes before the talk, I just handed all the stuff to my mum and said, "I can't do it. You've got to do it." She was like, "What?" I was like, "I can't do it. I just can't get up and do it." And then I had to go out the back. And then I realised, thinking about it, that that's where my anxiety started, but I didn't realise what it was. So, yeah. You're on mute, Spence.
Here we go. So that's not a technical difficulty. That's just a Spencer difficulty. Anyway, thank you for sharing, Emma. Everybody on this panel probably knows someone who has encountered people who have extreme anxiety, and we're probably all of us on different levels, and we're going to talk about that, especially triggered by Kingdom Hall events. Something you can't. It's a trauma that you can't escape as an ex-Jehovah's Witness sometimes. So, and Molly, we're gonna go to you next.
Yeah. So basically, my I guess mental health issue started when my father was out of the picture and my mom was left with a kid very much looked like my father. And I guess all her like toxic behavior towards my father recentered to me, which was very nice at 5 years old. And then I was indoctrinated as a Jehovah's Witness, which again, very nice as a 5 year old. And basically, around that time, I started having night terrors about seeing people tortured and dying and all that. And when I left the organization, I blatantly became aware that I need professional help because I was suicidal and I attempted at least 4 times. So I knew that when I'm 18 and my mother doesn't have to sign a document on me getting, uh, treatment, then I could finally get help and medication without my mother having to know anything about it because I was an adult, legally speaking. Anyway, and that's when I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety, or my therapist actually said that I was actually an existential, like I had existential anxiety. So she was like, basically your existence makes you anxious because you just keep running through these hoops. And then, we discussed my suicide attempt, and I did not go into the Jehovah's Witness stuff with her because I felt like, uncomfortable talking about it because you don't want to go into that too much. And then you kind of just then we kind of got into, the abusive tendencies in my family, and talked about that. And she added depression to the lot, so I have like bouts of depression. And I feel like, especially as I get older and older, I feel like religious trauma is very much a thing with me. I hate being called like sister and family and all. I'm like, hold your horses, we're not family unless you really, really prove that you have my back and stuff. I'm like, okay, like prove it first and then you can use those words around me. Otherwise, just don't. And basically, the reason why I started my activism is advocacy for those with anxiety, social anxiety, and depression and suicidal ideation, because I know how hard it is to even just realize that, oh, maybe it's not normal that I wanna die every second day, or maybe it's not normal that whenever I leave the house I have diarrhea or something like that. And it's important that we highlight that it has so many aspects. Like, I cannot be pushy and stuff like that. And then you just realize that it's so intervened. Like Emma said, that you feel sick, you feel you feel tight in your chest, and you lose your breath, and then you lose your train of thought and everything. So that's what I want to shed the light on, and childhood indoctrination also. And I just want to have more public awareness of religious trauma syndrome and religiosity. I think Spencer and I talk a lot about this in PM because it affects both of us. So that's my little story, I
Well,
guess.
thank you so much for sharing, Molly. And I mean, you were really in depth about telling us about your diagnosis and stuff. That's really brave of you to be able to share that much information with people. It's gonna help somebody, believe me.
I
Um,
sure hope to.
it will. And so we have Sharon, and then we're gonna have PJ, and well, Sharon, then me, and then PJ. Is that okay? Or no? I'm sorry. I'm messing up the order today. We actually had this all planned out. We're gonna have Sharon go last today because she's gonna carry us to the next segment, and so we'll go with PJ.
Okay. Well, looking back on when I was a Jehovah's Witness, I remember my first talk, having a panic attack before my first talk at the Kingdom Hall. And then when they read my name off, like, what was it, 2 weeks later, that I was going to have another talk, I freaked out again. And at a very young age, I think I was 12, I started taking Tylenol PM and drugging myself just so I could get through giving a talk. And like the other personal experiences I had with suicide and bipolar disorder and CPTSD and manic depression was all caused by the cult. And since I've gotten away from it all, it's gotten a lot better. But I find when I talk about it, it brings it all back up too. Like I can feel myself getting anxious just talking about a time when I was anxious. But yeah, my father, he had bipolar disorder. My big sister, we never did get her diagnosed, but obviously depression. My little sister was diagnosed as bipolar, and I have CPTSD. And let's see, and my son, he has depression and suicidal tendencies. So,
Thank you so much. And okay, give me 1 second here. I'm actually gonna have Sharon go, and then I'm gonna go. Go ahead, Sharon. Do you want to share? I think you're on mute. Hang on 1 second. There you go.
Okay. Okay. Hey, just really glad I missed the last couple of shows. I'm just really glad to be back on again, and I just have had a lot going on. But so anyway, geez, you guys did such a good job of summing it up. I'll try to replicate that. um, I think you know I grew up in my parents were inactive Jehovah's Witnesses, and because they were inactive, our Jehovah's Witness relatives basically shunned our family unofficially. And I grew up in this small town of 300 people. So I really, I grew up riding the fence where I wasn't allowed to have worldly friends, and I didn't have Jehovah's Witness friends either, because we didn't go to enough meetings. And our relatives who lived in the small town did go to all the meetings. So I grew up a really isolated life, and I think that that really affected my mom, who already had a tendency towards mental illness. And so it's still hard just to talk about it. But my mom used to terrorize me with her angry episodes. And so, anyways, eventually, I got baptized as a Jehovah's Witness, and then I ended up leaving. I was disfellowshipped. I left with my 4 children. And I think that all the stuff I went through as a child, all of the abuse that I went through, my brothers went through, mostly from our mother, um, it was like a triple whammy, the child abuse you experience in a Jehovah's Witness household. Um, anyways, and then when you leave and you're shunned, it really affects you. And then if you have children, you see that it affects your children, and so then that affects you. Anyway, so once I left, one day uh, I was driving down the highway, and I felt like I had this brick laying on my chest. And what I didn't realize was that was anxiety or panic. And I had been having that for almost a year after I was disfellowshipped. But it never dawned on me. I just took for granted that I couldn't get a full breath of air. So I ended up finding myself in the middle of the day stopping at a little pub. And I thought, well, because I was not a bar hopper, like that's not me. And so I thought, well, if I just go into this little pub, it's just a couple of old men sitting up at the bar. Uh, so, I'll go in there and I'll have a beer or two. So I took a book with me because I didn't want to look like a bad girl. And I sat in the corner with a book and I drank a beer or two until I could calm down, relax. So I did that. It started becoming a habit. And that was the only relief that I got. So one day I told a social worker my symptoms, and she said, "Well, you might want to talk to a doctor." So I did, and that started me on the getting mental health care, really. And um, eventually, it took them a while to get the medications right, and eventually, I was on over 2,000 milligrams of medication for post-traumatic stress disorder, and I had two different relapses with that, which pretty much left me homeless. And at some points when my medications were too high, I was like a zombie and I couldn't really function and take care of my kids properly, like emotionally connecting with them because I was sleeping. So, anyways, I don't mean to get too wordy here, but uh, mental health is like so important. It's so important to me. And I see Spencer talking, but I don't hear her. So,
I
anyways,
apologize. I'm having
yeah,
some
later,
back here. Go ahead. I'm listening.
later, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the addiction uh, issue with XJWs.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. It is
Thanks.
uh, it's hard to share these experiences because it puts you right back there, like PJ was saying.
Yep.
You think you
Mhm.
move through them and you move past them, and we're in positions, guys, that we're helping other people, and yet it is still a sensitive subject. It's still a sensitive spot. A lot of us on this panel, if you've looked at past episodes, have experienced close friends and family who have succumbed to suicide or have been suicidal. A lot of, and you've heard people on our panel already talk about suicidal ideations that we ourselves have had to go through in this journey. So there's so many different things I can say about mental health awareness in the month and the day. I think there's a day and then there's also a month. I have to say that I'm just grateful to have be out of the cult because I do believe that being in the cult exacerbated a lot of my already I was already predisposed genetically to have some issues because of my family and biology and the way the world works. The mental illness runs on both sides of my family. We have a lot of family members who have either anxiety disorders or um, some more extreme forms of mental illness and everything in between. Um, Even though I've had a chance to help people out online and help people out of the cult, including my own family, I would say that the cause of my life has been helping other people who are afflicted by mental health challenges. That, I mean, alongside activism, I just feel like it goes hand to hand because of my own makeup. And I was a undiagnosed bipolar child. Um, my father was later a Jehovah. He was a Jehovah's Witness, and he was later diagnosed after he left. I was diagnosed after I left. And had we been diagnosed a lot earlier, I just wonder if the dynamic of our abusive family would have changed. Not saying that he was abusive because of bipolar, but he was very frustrated within the Jehovah's Witness system. They were telling him that he didn't. Well, the elders would tell him that in addition to his you know substance abuse problem, that well, we all know that discouraged therapy and discouraged secular help outside of them, and it had a ripple effect on our family because I'm also within a community of the African American community where we are sometimes ragged on in the press and other mediums because of the fact that we tend to, some of us tend to not take it as serious or in our community, because I can tell you stories of my own parents who didn't treat it as real. And so when they, it was, that was compounded by being in a religion that didn't acknowledge mental illness, only if you were an apostate. So that means that they said it in a derogatory way. And I have to say that even in my community, uh, the ex Jehovah Witness community, which all of us is a part of, most of us are a part of. You know, I can't speak for everybody that's watching us, but um, when I first entered the ex Jehovah Witness community, I realized that, you know, a lot of us were really broken in a lot of different ways. But I also realized that there is also stigma within our own community. If I could just keep it real, y'all, you know, there are some people who, you know, people are people, no matter where you are, you know, whether they're ex Jehovah Witness, whatever. But in our, even in our community, you would think that we would be a little bit more um, accommodating. I'm looking for a word, a little bit more, because of our own background of being called mentally diseased apostates, or in a derogatory manner, or a lot of us have suffered familial illness. But um, I would say that, you know, even within our community, there is a stigma. You know, we've been in the groups. We know what people say when they get mad. Oh, you bipolar. Oh, you this. Or you got a mental. Oh, you crazy. Everybody crazy. That's you know, we say those things in jest, or say those things when we get mad, but it's not funny, and it's not. It shouldn't be used as ammunition against another person, or the fact, or somehow they are less than, or their platform is not credible because they're going through things. I've witnessed that, you know, a lot. I've even witnessed trolling. You know, there's a, I won't say his name, but there is a very, uh, I won't say prominent, but infamous ex Jehovah Witness who suffers from mental illness, and it's very apparent. I'll just say that on his pages every day, and you would be surprised at some of the comments that you see on his page. So I do think that mental health awareness, and this is not to virtual signal or shame anybody, but it's to, this is what it is, to make people aware, because some people do it out of ignorance and they just don't know. And that's why we're here, to educate as much as that we can. And activism comes in so many different forms. You know, you can't be on the protest saying shunning kills and people are committing suicide, the watchtower, and be hypocritical in your real life, the way you treat other people. So that's a little bit about me. Uh, I've had, you know, family members who have been who who've had who went through with suicide. I've had been at the bedside of my best friend who almost died after shunning from the witnesses, and a family friend who actually shot herself in the head because of over that, because of the mental distress. Because mental distress is also real. Just because you can't see physically a cast on our arms, or a, we're not giving you, saying that we have serious illnesses like cancer or something, that doesn't mean it, just because you don't see it doesn't mean that it's not, you know, just as debilitating, you know, that you can't get out of bed some mornings, or, you know, we're all going through various things, and we do need each other. We understand each other more than anybody. So anyway, that's a little bit about us here on the glass table. And our, we'll welcome your comments to share with us. Um, we are also streaming in a group today. I'm sorry here. We're streaming in a group today. We're streaming in Emma's group. So if you're a person, this is a very touchy subject. I'm sorry. Give me one second here. Uh, if you're a person, and this is a very delicate subject. This is a very delicate subject. If you're a person and you don't want people to see your comment, you might want to comment it in Emma's group, or even think about going there to share your stories. And we won't flash your comments on the screen. those comments will be able to differentiate from the other ones. So I
Right.
just wanted to be able to give you that privacy, because this is a delicate subject, because we do want to hear from you. It's just
Yeah.
not us
And
sharing. We want to go ahead.
can I just say that sometimes, excuse me, thank you.
Okay, so before we move
Sorry.
on, give me 1 second. I'm gonna be off screen, but go ahead, Molly. I just want to check in with Sharon.
Right. So basically, what I wanted to say is that in the XJW community, sometimes I've seen it happen that people use the trauma they suffered to excuse behavior. Like they are saying that you don't have a moral compass because you thought that in the world everything passes, but then you know um to an extent that's true. We are taught that the worldly people are like crazy sex addicts and druggies, and they can do whatever the hell they want because they have no consequences. But that's not true, because we have to realize that eventually you using your trauma to shield yourself from consequences is no good. You need to take responsibility, get your ass to therapy, and get your mental mental state in order before you try and get on a pedestal and try to tell others how to proceed out of the organization. Um yeah, we all have trauma, and we all have the baggage of PTSD, CPTSD, and religious trauma syndrome. But that doesn't mean that you can just blatantly mow over other people's feelings and other people's privacy and boundaries the world because you were brainwashed into thinking that the world doesn't have rules. It does, and that's pretty obvious by laws and all that. And if a person says stop talking, just stop talking, and don't go over and over and over again trying to pressure them into bending to your will, because that's just no good.
Sorry. Yes, that's a good point, Molly. Before we move on to our next segment here, I just wanted to acknowledge just some of the comments here. Stay at home dog. I think you're new with us. I haven't seen you on our stream. We thank you for joining us. He says our bravery will definitely help others find some truth and support from those who know the real deal the cult has destroyed. Thank you, Holly, for joining us. And I believe you are also new. And we do thank everybody for joining us, whether you are new or whether you are visiting us for the first time.
And we have one of my friends, Annette, on the line, or she was there earlier. I'm not sure if you're still there, but hey.
All right. So we are going to go into our next segment. Our next segment, we're going to actually, some of the comments is talking about the governing body being responsible and the Jehovah's Witnesses being responsible for a lot that we are experiencing. So what we're going to do is actually dive into that. Give me a moment. I'm going to set up our screen share. As I'm doing that, did anyone have anything else they wanted to say or share? Give me 1 second here. We're listening to you in the comments. Molly, you have a picture you want to share, actually.
Oh, yeah. Do you have it or want me to resend real quick?
I have it. I'm just, you know, our application is really special today, y'all. We're gonna get through it. We gonna get through this. We're gonna get through it. Uh, tell me if you can see that. Can you guys see that?
Yeah.
All right. So you want to tell us a little bit about this picture we're seeing here?
Yeah. So as you can see, I'm pointing like an idiot, thinking that anyone can see where my fingers are pointing. So the left hand, like the leftmost side picture, is me in 8th grade. I was a full-blown zealous JW. I would have snitched you out if you ever broke the rules. I wanted to marry a battlite, y'all, and I wanted to be a needies greater. So, I was a whole package. And as you can see on my face, I was not quite confident or happy about myself, even though I was a good little JW girl. And then the middle picture is me right after leaving. I believe a few weeks or months after leaving, and as you can see, my smile is just super forced, and yeah, I was not feeling good about myself. And then the rightmost picture is me last fall. As you can see, I'm smiling so much that my eyes are not even visible. I'm wearing colorful makeup. My hair is messy, and I believe in that picture I was listening to some like very non-JW appropriate music. So
Thank you so much for sharing, Molly. Before we actually go into the screen share or portion of our program where we present the Watchtower, we actually want to show you guys some clips from a video, which we're going to actually link in the comments below, of a former Jehovah's Witness on a former Jehovah's Witnesses platform talking about mental illness. He gives his credentials. He's credentialed, so he's just not some layman actually talking about these subjects. And no, just notice this next clip, some of the things that he had to say.
I've discovered that there are many serious mental health problems, and these are quite common. They're not exceptional. In fact, I found about 10% of the average congregation is in serious need of some type of therapy. So we're not talking about a small number.
10% is not a small number. And for any Jehovah's Witnesses that might be on our stream that might want to dispute that and say, well, how will he know, and blah 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 blah, let's just take a quick poll on our panel. I know people in my old congregation that were on anxiety medication, that should have been on medication but weren't, because of what the Jehovah Witness stigma about medication and therapy. So that's one person. So that's 1 out of 5. What about you, Emma?
To be honest, I was only 21 when I left, and I wasn't really in the mindset when I was 19. So I didn't really, to me, that didn't occur to me to even know about that kind of stuff.
What about you, Molly?
So that's obviously yours truly. I was a hot mess. And then there's my JW mom, who basically slept through the entire day. Guess what? It was depression, but she just wrote it off as, oh, I just love sleeping. And she always said something along the lines that, because then I'm not stressed. So that ought to tell you something about Jehovah's happy people. They need to sleep through the day to cope. And then there's my JW sister, who tried to commit suicide thrice and then ran away from home, and I shielded her from the police. Then there's who else? Yeah, there's the grandma who lived with us, who was also depressive and suicidal by all accounts. She deliberately made herself sick on multiple occasions and stuff. And we have like 300-ish JWs in my town, and that's already almost 10 that I noted. And I was like 16 when I left.
That's. What about you, PJ? I know I'm asking people to go back a little bit, but do you remember, now that looking back in your congregation?
Oh yeah, besides the ones that I've already mentioned in my family, I had some cousins through marriage to my husband who, when I was a Jehovah's Witness, whose father was an elder. Through that family connection, I had several cousins that had issues and either turned into alcoholics later in life or turned to drugs or something else eventually when they got kicked out. It destroyed their lives because they didn't get the treatment that they needed while they were in because it was stigmatized.
What about you, Sharon? Looking back on your. Okay. Can Sharon hear us? I think you're on mute. Okay. Sharon's still working with the technical issues here. We're going to continue to work in the background here. Sharon, you should probably leave and come back to see if it'll resolve it.
Can I just
And
say
then,
about? Oh,
so,
sorry.
so with just in that clip there, I mean, we had what, 4 out of 5 members on the glass table, that experienced or knew of or was aware of uh, mental issues, or and and the thing about it, when you go through it, you can recognize it. You recognize it in other people. So here's our next clip.
Began to work for various mental health clinics. I also taught psychology at the college level. I was an associate professor of psychology at a college, and this exposed me to the problems. I also have done quite a bit of research on the problems of mental illness among the witnesses, and I found that other researchers found the same thing I did, namely that these problems were very serious.
So you can see that this particular person speaking on the program is credentialed. So and he's not just a doctor that is a name only, he actually practices. And I think that's important because if you go on this YouTube video, you'll see some comments from the Jehovah's Witnesses who took this video to task. But I think these are really important. Hey, Sharon. Sharon's back. And here's the next clip.
Many people who were raised witnesses have so many problems later on as adults. And I worked for the court for a number of years, and many of the individuals I worked with were raised witnesses. And it intrigued me how someone raised a witness could end up a murderer, a rapist, involved in some heinous crime. But I found many were raised and involved themselves in these crimes because they were so socially maladjusted that when they became adults, they were not adequately able to cope with adult responsibilities and adult life, and thus, because of maladjustment, ended up involving themselves in these crimes that they did, that I saw them involve themselves in.
So you see that he also works with the criminal in the criminal justice system here. So he's just not a doctor, just not like I said, there are some doctors who are doctors who get their degree and they kind of do other things, are not in the practice that they actually work for. You can tell that he does. Did anybody have any comments on the clips that we saw before we move on, Sharon? I just want to check. No, I still can't hear. Hang on, Molly. No, still working on it. Okay, Sharon's still working on the stream. Go ahead, Molly.
Yeah, so about what he said about us, us. Look at me sleeping in Kingdom Hall mode, y'all. Being maladjusted as adults. So basically, I would say most definitely because I feel like religion requires a kind of adolescence from the followers, because you have to constantly be a child of God, a child of God. You constantly have to be in this submissive state, and that doesn't allow you to take control of your own life and make your own decisions and platform yourself. And PJ mentioned substance abuse. I, to this day, never get drunk. I drink 1 or 2 glasses, maybe 3 or 4 at best, but I still to this day cannot get drunk because my mama was usually drunk every weekend. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess she was an alcoholic. She was never diagnosed, but her behavior was very much like that. And I'm like, okay, I'm not risking it becoming something that I can't cope with.
PJ, you said did you have a comment or did I miss you?
Yeah, no, what they had brought up earlier and what you were asking, things that we could think of when I was getting together the list of suicides and murders and what was it, suicide/murders for the mom protests. I remember being sent some information about a teenager from Russia who took a gun and shot like several people in his school and in public and
Wow.
then himself. And he was a Jehovah's Witness and he was only 17.
Mm,
And then the newspaper article that we were in, it reminded me of the Kego Harbor murder suicide,
mhm.
that this pushed that woman to the point where she killed her husband, her adult son, and her adult daughter, drowned the dog in the bathtub, and then shot herself. That
Yikes.
it pushes people to do some things you wouldn't think people would do.
I know of, and sometimes the Jehovah's Witness kids, when they actually get involved with stuff, some of them are worse than, like you said, they take it a little bit further than the next person. Because I know personally, growing up with a young Jehovah's Witness guy, he was a teenager, and he got in trouble for, gosh, I don't even want to say, he murdered a girl. He tried to steal a car, murdered the girl that was in the car, and it was a priest in the car as well. He stripped the priest butt naked, put him in the back of the trunk, and caught a case for like 30 years. And it was weird because we all knew him, and it was just, it was a heinous thing to go through. Let's see, Sharon is back.
Yeah, can you hear
Yes,
me?
yes, we can hear
It was
you.
testing my mental health.
No, right? This is stress and anxiety right now. Right.
Okay, I have something I'd love to say about this subject.
Okay.
Okay, so number one, when I was young, obviously, like I said earlier, my mom had some mental health issues, and I remember my dad actually purchased a whole set of psychology books,
Hmm.
and my brother built these huge beautiful bookcases, and I remember looking up and seeing all those psychology books, and I remember thinking my dad's not supposed to have those, like, and my mom would sit around and read self-help books, and
Wow.
I remember thinking, oh my gosh, what's going on with my mom? We're not supposed to read self-help books, like, so I grew up riding the fence, as a Jehovah's Witness, and thinking that helping yourself or going to a doctor or getting medicine was wrong. Whereas if my mom would have went and got the help, it would have affected the
Mm.
whole family better. Well, anyway, so I remember somebody in the one of our relatives saying, well, if you do have to go to a psychiatrist, you want to go to Dr. True. Dr. True, I'm originally from Ohio. Dr. True is like on the other side of the border, up in Michigan, I think. And so Jehovah's Witnesses from Ohio and Michigan would travel hours just to go
Mhm.
to this one psychiatrist. And the
That's
reason
crazy.
was because he was a Jehovah's Witness, and we were told that he wouldn't lead us away from the truth, you know. And so I would say last summer I actually met with an ex Jehovah's Witness who struggles with some mental health issues, mostly, severe depression and anxiety.
Mm.
And uh, when I met with her, she actually mentioned she had been to this doctor and he had treated her for her illness. And I was just like in awe because I had only heard whispers when I was young of this Dr. True. He was like the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain. But to actually meet somebody that was treated by him was, to me, was just like iconic. Anyways, that's the one thing I wanted to say, but she wasn't too happy with the care that she got, by the way. I wanted to say that I did have an uncle that was an elder who had mental illness that didn't get treated, who committed suicide as well. And I ran across some paperwork that my cousin had given me. And when I was still a Jehovah's Witness, but I never read it until just this last summer. This was a document that was written by a registered nurse in mental health care that the society used to write this document. And it was, if you're suffering from mental illness, da 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 da. If you've been abused, da 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 da. And so they actually used this guy to write this document. But what's interesting about the document is it all goes back to the Bible and it all goes back to indoctrination. So it wasn't really a document to help with mental health. It was a medical registered nurse that they used to really re-indoctrinate the people. So
Wow.
it didn't benefit my family. My cousin is a shut-in. Her dad died. The rest of the family started trying to commit suicide. I mean, it was a mess. So yeah, actually seeking professional medical help outside of the organization is very beneficial.
Yes.
So
And necessary
yes.
sometimes. If you have access, we're actually going to have a show later. You should follow sorry, I can't talk today. Our Glass Table page, because it has our events there. There's actually a ticker across the screen here that actually says what I'm trying to say. Doing that, you'll be notified of when we have a show talking about how an outreach to ex-Jehovah Witnesses who need help and need assistance. And so might not want to miss that one. We see your comments. We're going to move to our interview that we have today. And then we'll share more about Jehovah's Witnesses and the crisis that they have within the mental health and not getting assistance for it within the org. We have Angela on. Let's see if we can bring her on here. Hello,
Yay!
Angela.
Hi, everybody.
Now, Angela knows about the technical difficulties we've had this week.
Yeah,
she knows it a
was
little bit more
rough.
intimately.
Yeah.
So
But we
thank you.
survived.
We
made it.
yes, we're doing it.
Yeah.
We thank you so much for having. Thank you for coming on to share your stories today. So we wanted to hear a little bit about you and your advocacy. So we're all ears.
Okay. So I guess a little bit I've kind of been listening in on everybody else's stories today too. So, the more people I meet who have left Jehovah's Witnesses organization or any high control religious cultish group, it's kind of really shocking. I don't think I ever get over how similar our experiences are and how much we share as far as from a mental health perspective. So my background, my story is I'm a third generation born in JW, who grew up very much in very similar situations as, the other ladies on today. Growing up, I absolutely hated being a Jehovah's Witness. I was embarrassed that I was a Jehovah's Witness. We lived in a very small town. I hated going door to door because I was always afraid that somebody I went to school with, or one of my teachers would answer the door. So at the age of 18, when I graduated high school, I kind of ran away to the big city so I could, live my life the way I wanted to live. And unfortunately, small town girls who lived in a bubble become victims. So I was a victim of date rape. When I went to the elders and reported it, because he was also Jehovah's Witness, I was told that they knew who this person was. It wasn't the first time somebody had approached them. But because he wasn't baptized and I was put on private reproof. I wasn't allowed to associate with anybody. I wasn't allowed to make comments at the Kingdom Hall, blah, 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 blah. Shortly after that, I did attempt a suicide, and without, using up a lot of time on that story, I ended up running away to Toronto, which was about 3 provinces away, and really kind of developed a very self-destructive lifestyle. And because, if your mother doesn't love you, then really, what are you doing, right? So long story short, had a couple kids, raised some kids, tried to do some of the XJW support advocacy type activities before the internet, because I am that old. And, did that a little bit, and it kind of just wasn't my thing. I don't think that mentally I was in a place for that. So fast forward, lived my life, did my stuff, still partake, in very high risk behaviors. I was an avid sport bike rider. I love to take risks. I love the adrenaline rush of that aspect of motorcycling. And when I got to about the mid 2000s, the suicidal stuff started coming up for me again. There was some wrinkles in my personal life. And I found myself sitting at a doctor's office, having that conversation where I need help. Sorry. So I did do the medication thing for a number of years. And it wasn't until I was on the medication where I could kind of think clear that I realized that I was probably depressed my whole life. Yeah. And that there were some really significant things that I needed to change, not about my life, but about my thinking. And it wasn't really until I started with Al-Anon, because my stepfather was an alcoholic. So I started with that because I thought that's where the family dysfunction is. That's where this is all broken, because we grew up with an alcoholic. But there was still something missing. They really did a lot of, I did a lot of growing there, and I did learn a lot of stuff that I wasn't aware of, the dysfunction and how each individual of that family takes on a role. And there was still something not really quite right. So then I started kind of doing, a little bit internet searching, and I tripped across Crisis of Conscience by Ray Franz. And I got halfway through that book, and I was so disgusted with the Malawi, Mexico incident. And I know a lot of people don't know much about that, but I actually put the book down and I have never touched it again. I was so disgusted. And it's the same kind of disgust that I had when I found out that child sexual abuse is not only being tolerated but covered up, and that this has been going on since the 50s and the 60s. So in my as the internet grew and as there became more support groups, I kind of tripped into a friendship and started doing some behind the scenes support of advocacy groups and stuff like that. And it was then that I saw that there was such a huge amount of people leaving, but these people were so, I don't want to use the word damaged, because we're not damaged in the sense that there's something wrong with us, but we have been so horribly traumatized in our lives, especially as children who were born into this organization or in any of these organizations. We had no choice in this, and we are left with the baggage and the crap and the mental exhausting, I don't even know if there's a word for it, but it was, I couldn't sit there and not do something, because if I don't do something, who will? I've been out for over 30 years. And it's given me an opportunity to really stretch out that learning curve, that learning component of healing, and to really truly understand a lot of, I have a huge fascination with all things psychology. And I really started doing a lot of reading about how these groups not only just get control, but the damage that's done, the harm that's done from mind control techniques and things that are done to children. And I couldn't just sit there and not do anything. So it was kind of at that point where I was like, I still have family in. I've been shunned for, like I said, I've been out for 30 years. I've been shunned for 30 years. And that's a really lonely thing. And I really wish that when I had left, that there were apostates, these horrible, unloving people that would have been there to support me, because I think I would have made different choices had I understood, really what was going on in my life. And when I started kind of getting involved from that component, where the mental health advocacy, I really realized that there are no services for people who come out of these groups. The timing was great because Leah Remini came out with her TV show that really put a huge spotlight on it. And they created an Aftermath Foundation for victims of Scientology. And I said to myself, I have to do that. So that's what I've been busy doing over the last almost a year, is building out an organization in Canada, because we have nothing here. We're so lacking, it's almost embarrassing. But there's nothing here to support people coming out. And the people who are coming out are these born-in children who are now 16, 17, 18 years old. And they're coming out into a world unprepared and not realizing what's going on here from a mental health perspective, and they're not getting the help and the support that they need. So how's that for an overview?
You did good. You did really good. Thank you so much
I
for
almost
sharing.
didn't even cry.
Hey, we are here. We cry on the grass table. So if you don't want to see crying, y'all gotta go somewhere else. We cry, we boo-hoo, we laugh, we do all of that. Go ahead, Sharon. Sharon, I'm sorry. I think Sharon trying to say something. Go ahead, Angela. I'm sorry.
So, and that's a super, super important point. And when we were talking the other day, I brought it up also. I think one of the most misunderstood things is that this is not, especially as a born-in, this is not something that we ever hit a finish line with. Right. This is a lifelong, I've done so much personal development, and I've done so much work creating a life that I love, that's healthy, that's supportive. And yet there's still those days where I go back to that, and that wound is still there. It never really scars. You know what I mean? It's just kind of like this scab. And I think that's where sometimes we run into problems, or we run into challenges, is because we think that at some point we're just going to hit this magic finish line and everything's going to go back. We're going to have a normal life, and we're going to be super happy, and everything's just going to fall into place for us. And, unfortunately, I'm a speaker of truth. I tell it like it is. And that's just not the realistic thing in this, is that this is something that we carry with us forever. And what you do with it. So, when I look at all of the abuse and stuff that I've been through in my life, I have to make it about something positive, or I'm just going to end up back on medication. And that's not what I want for me. And that's not what I want for the people that I care about that are in my life. So I think that's a super, super important thing to understand, is that, yeah, you're going to cry today, and you might cry next week, and you might cry next year. And that's okay. That's part of this. Those of us who are unfortunate enough to get caught up in these groups, this is, unfortunately, this is our reality. And when you get real about that, sometimes you can really make so much better choices about how you're going to look after yourself and who you surround yourself with.
Yes. You preaching today, Angela? Go ahead.
Well, it is Sunday.
Well, you make me want to say amen. I got on my Sunday best today. All right.
Hallelujah. Amen.
Right. Amen. All right, Sharon, you had something you want to say?
Yeah, I wanted to point out one thing that Angela touched on, which was when the XJWs, in particular young people, but when the XJWs come out of this cult, or any cult in Canada, you said that there really isn't anything for them. Now, here in the United States and other countries, people might also say the same thing. there are programs here in the United States that are very helpful, like, you know, the number one, which we'll probably talk about later, is NAMI. You know, that saved my life. NAMI saved my life. But I think in particular what Angela was referring to, and she can correct me if I'm wrong, but in Canada, each province makes their own decisions for mental health, like how much money that particular government is going to distribute for mental health. So, and frankly, there's not a lot of money distributed for mental health in Canada in general, and especially the smaller outlying provinces. And I'll mention one, which is Newfoundland. Newfoundland does not have enough supportive services. People go there, our ex-JWs and other people that are suicidal, they go to the hospital. These people shouldn't even really be doctors there. I hate to say it, but at certain hospitals there, they just say, oh, you know, whatever, goodbye, you know, see ya, you know. They don't even prescribe medications. There's no provisions for them to have inpatient care like there is here in the United States. And it's a huge problem up in Canada. So I'm really glad that Angela is on, because more government leaders in Canada need to hear this.
I'm going to add to this too. So there's an organization they have a couple of head offices here in Toronto, CAMH, which is the go-to organization for mental health. Anybody who's found not criminally insane or not criminally responsible due to mental health issues or insanity, they house them. So they have like a floor that's their prison ward. I called them because I was having a really hard time finding any kind of information about how to set up my organization from a mental health support perspective, and to find out what's available in the communities, because as Sharon says, every city, every province has their own thing, does their own thing, and it's super hard to find services. So if you're not in a huge city like I am, getting mental health help is insanely hard. So I had called this organization and got the woman from the switchboard and said to her, listen, here's what I'm trying to do, and I'm looking for resources and I don't know where to start and I haven't been very successful. Is there somebody that you can put me through to that I could speak to that could maybe help me or point me in the right direction? And the woman gave me attitude like I was wasting her time and put me through to one department, and they weren't sure what I was even talking about, and they bumped me back to her. She took my name and number. I've never heard from them. This organization collects millions of dollars from the federal government, millions of dollars in donations every year. They have huge campaigns to raise money for their programs, and when you call them, there is no help. So I actually had to take a little step back because I was so discouraged that I couldn't even get help from this organization that proclaims all of these amazing things that they do. And it literally sat me on my butt for about a week because I just didn't even know where to go to from there. I also had a conversation with a psychiatrist who operates out of Newfoundland. And so I was on the phone with her, and she said to me, I don't really tell people that I do cult support services for cult members, because within my own industry, people make fun of me if I talk about this. And that's her specialty. That's what she does. It's, you know, when she went through her degree or whatever, she specialized in people coming out of high control religious groups and cults. And because she used the word cult, she was ostracized by her peers, and people mocked her and made fun of her. And that's a problem. That's a huge problem.
Yeah, actually, in Newfoundland, it's so bad that I know, what was it? In the last, I would say, 4 years, there have been several newspaper articles where teachers and all sorts of professionals are committing suicide left and right. I actually know of someone, I know someone in Newfoundland who has lost, I think, 5 friends to suicide in that small province. And they were just shirked off, just, you know, just shirked
Well, and
off.
the sad story is that every time that this person goes for help, they basically treat her like a criminal. They
Yes.
dismiss her, they patch her up, and they send her out. And it's, I'm 3-4 provinces away. I can't help her physically. I can't provide
Right.
support for her physically.
And
And it's been a frustration. And now that we're, locked down, people are reaching out because they're being kicked out of their homes, and we can't even put them up in a hotel right now, never mind find mental health help. And it's just such a struggle to just, because initially you just want to help them put a roof over their head, get them somewhere safe. And one of the mandates of our organization is to educate existing community organizations. So instead of reinventing what's already out there, we want to utilize existing community-based programs, but educate them to what they need to be listening for. Because as ex-members, we have a language. We have, when you sit in a room as, let's say you were mugged, you were assaulted. If you sit in a room with other people who were assaulted, there are certain mannerisms and conversations that you pick up on, and immediately. I can sit in a room with other women who are rape victims, and I know who are rape victims. There's a language to it. And the existing community-based organizations need to be aware of that and need to be educated. So it's not even so much that we're just advocating, but we need to teach people as well. When these ex-members come to you, they've just had their whole world ripped out from under their feet. We grew up in an environment where everything is our fault. So they're going to come to you with that energy and with that language. And instead of trying to create an organization where we have to worry about food pantries and housing insecurity and, therapy and all of this stuff, why not just educate the people who are already in these organizations doing the work and just say to them, you just need to watch out for this, because this person, you need to love a little bit harder. You need to support a little bit deeper, because they're not used to working with people whose entire family and social circle has just eliminated you from existence.
Angela, you are doing some awesome work here. I wanted to, I'm sorry, Sharon, before you go, I wanted to let people see your site. So let me try to pull it back up here again.
Sure. So our organization is called AURA Canada, and it stands for the Association of Religious Rehabilitation. I really wanted to make it very open to all people who are suffering from religious trauma or religious abuse. So we really are not about, what am I trying to say? We're really about helping anybody who's coming out of Scientology, the Mormons, the LDS, Jehovah's Witnesses, any of the little tiny cultish groups. We're willing to help and work with anybody, support anybody. Again, like I said at the beginning, even though each of us come from our own family dynamics and different parts of the world, we have a shared experience. And even though I didn't grow up as a Scientologist, I can tell you, watching the Leah Remini special, there was a ton of times I sat there with my jaw open, because it was my story too. It was my pain too. And that, I think, is why she added the Jehovah's Witnesses to the end of that last season. So the website is aorra.org. The site is up and running. We have a skeleton crew of people like Sharon who help us out and trying to find resources. our biggest challenge right now, obviously, is setting up an organization that can, put somebody up in a hotel, or, put them on a plane and get them somewhere where we can help them better than, 4 or 5 provinces away. So our biggest challenge right now is funding. And that's so huge, because we're going to have to piece it out, because there is no funding for anybody who's been abused by a religion, unfortunately. And, we need to really start tweaking the politicians' ears and changing some laws around coercive control and what a cult is, and bringing awareness in that aspect. And that takes, unfortunately, that takes finances. And without sounding like some kind of, public television broadcaster, that really is right now our biggest challenge. And I've had to really rethink some things, because everybody wants to donate to the dog rescue or the cat rescue, or, the hungry children in Africa, but who's helping those victims who are sitting alone somewhere in the middle of nowhere with no friends, no family, thinking that something's seriously wrong with them and they want to end their lives.
Right.
So, nobody wants to talk about those stories. I do mental health advocacy on my private Facebook timeline all the time, and it's constantly crickets. Nobody wants to talk about that. They'll make fun of me for posting recipes, food recipes, and sharing my foods and talking about my dog and stuff. But when I start talking about mental health and suicide, nobody wants to talk about it.
Sharon.
And that's a problem.
Yeah. On a positive note, I would like to say that in Canada, we have Dwayne MacArthur, who started XJW Recovering from Addictions. It's a support group on Facebook. And I remember the day that he first started that group, and it popped up on my notifications. And and I looked, was like, oh, this is interesting. This is great. It's really needed. So I looked at it and I was like, I think this is the first real, recovery from addiction group, and that I was aware of. And so, out of all the hundreds of Facebook groups, like there's one, or maybe a couple, I don't know. Anyways, so I got a hold of Dwayne that morning, and I said, hey, do you have, because groups like that, you need a disclaimer, because they're not providing mental health counseling. And he also, needed the links to like suicide, the suicide hotline and stuff like that. And I said, do you have that? And he said, no, and I'm on my way to work. And he goes, could you add that for me? I was like, well, you have to make me an administrator so I can do that. So he did. So Rick Bear and him, Rick Bear's from Connecticut, and then Dwayne MacArthur is from Canada. The three of us kind of kicked that group off, and then I don't know. I tend to take breaks. Sometimes I have to take my own mental health breaks, and so I just kind of backed out of the group for a while, but I still post in there. So I talked to Dwayne this morning, and I let him know I was going to mention his group. They do talk and encourage each other. It's a peer support group for addiction recovery. And then also, when Angela and I were actually tag teaming an XJW in Newfoundland that needed supportive services and for mental health, and we just kept running into roadblocks. So, we were just basically staying in communication with her to give her hope to keep her going. And then I thought, I'm just going to have to create a support group in that area. And then as soon as I can find somebody else in that area, to turn it over to them so they can run a support group. So I started one, and this was like a year and a half ago. And I don't know how it happened, but somehow I ran across an actual Newfoundland XJW support group, but the way it was worded on Facebook, you couldn't find it. So I think her name, she goes by Leanne Lee up there. She has a group up there with about, I don't know, 30 or so members. And here she was only 15 minutes from our sweet loved one that we were, you know, we had our arms around her from a distance. They ended up making friends, and it really helped her a lot. So, you know, the actual meetup groups with qualified, good people, not just any Yahoo out there that could take advantage of somebody, but we really need those meetup groups all over the place, because they can meet at restaurants, they can meet for coffee, a group of them. I used to run groups in 3 states when I first started I started doing that about 10 years ago. But it takes money, just like Angela's saying, it costs to do this kind of work. So, and for some of us, you know, depending on our mental health, maybe we're on disability for, like, you know, I've been on disability for several years for post-traumatic stress disorder. So if I created a support group, I had to save every, you know, extra penny I could, plan a couple of months in advance, so I had the money to travel and actually buy myself something to eat at the restaurant. You know, like, it takes a lot of love and effort to do the work we do. So Angela is a really good person. I trust her with all of my might. If anybody wants to donate to, she calls it Aura, I call it Aora. If anybody wants to donate, that's a really good nonprofit to donate to.
Well, thank you, ladies. And we
Thank
have
you,
in the
Sharon.
comments, David, I can't say your last name, so I'm just going to say your first name. He says that the Malawi, Mexico was a biggie cover up by the board. So that's very understandable that you said you
I
put the
think
book down.
so just I think the important thing to understand about the Malawi Mexico fiasco is people died. People died over that because the organization was talking out of both sides of their face. That is what made it so horrendous. So anybody who's not aware of that, you can either pick the Crisis of Conscience. I believe that's available on PDF now. You can read about it there. Ray Franz was at at Bethel when that all went down. That was kind of the beginning of the end for him.
Paul Grundy he has a great write-up on the Malawi, Mexico,
Yeah,
on the jwfacts.com site as well. There is someone saying, is there anything that like your website or your services that exist in the US? Do you know?
there are little hubs of groups I've run into every now and then. I can't think of anybody's name off the top of my head right now, but there are several little groups. You'll typically find Facebook pages associated with the support groups and the organizations in the States that are similar to what I've set up.
Angela says they need something like that in Australia. And David says that people tend to avoid talking about mental health issues just like they would avoid talking about death and taxes unless they have to face it by being forced to deal with it head on or is ignored Sally. So yes, Angela, we want to thank you so much for joining us today. Did you have any last thoughts before we move on to our next segment?
No, I'm like super appreciative for you guys having me on today so I can talk about things that make me cry.
Oh, well, we didn't want to make you cry. I know it's a sensitive subject, but we thank you for Sharon says she wants to say something.
Yeah. I have been working on developing a website, and once it's up and running, I've been working a lot. I'm back to work, you know. But once it's up and running, then the name of it is jwsurvivorsoriginal.com. And yes, it is my goal to start a nonprofit in the US similar to Aora. And so, anyways, it's a process though.
So we're looking forward to that. We're also looking forward to, you guys, we're going to put the website in the comments so you guys can go out and check it out. I know you said that it's up and running. You just got it up and running, but it looks really nice. It's very clean, easy to find stuff, you know, if you're looking for something. I am going to not name drop. I don't know if this is a name drop or a website drop, but Paul Grundy also has a new site. for newly exiting Jehovah's Witnesses. So if you are a newly exiting Jehovah's Witness, I think he partnered with Renee. I can't say her last name. Please don't forgive me, Renee. I read the names on Facebook, but I can never actually say them.
Kordeshi.
There we go. Partner with her to make that site. So if you're looking, you might the person that asked whether or not we have any U.S. services here, you might want to kind of browse around there to see if you see anything. And again, I hate to do this, but actually I don't hate to do it. I love to do it. We're actually doing a show about resources and helping each other out. So you might want to look out for that. Angela, we thank you so much for coming on, and we thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thank you.
Please come back again. Don't be a stranger now. I think you're mute.
Absolutely. Once I get started, you can't make me. I can't stop. I just can't stop.
You got so much good information. We love hearing you talk. So go, by all means, please come back on the glass table.
And there was so many things we didn't even get a chance to touch on today, too. So
right, it's so hard because we have such limited time. But we thank you so much, Angela, and we are going to move on to our next segment. Our next segment is going to be headed up by our very own Emma. Speaking of Paul Grundy, you've been browsing around on his site, right?
Yep. I've got to say, I think JW Facts has always been my go-to to find out any information. If you see me looking this way, it's because I'm reading off the bigger screen.
Okay.
So yeah, he did some. There's some really interesting case studies that he covered on his website.
Yes, I'm trying to bring it up for you, Emma. Give me a second here. I don't want you to begin to start talking and then escape us here. Let me see if I can bring it up here.
In the meanwhile, can I just say for anyone who wonders if any kind of, like, it's not just religions that can be harmful and toxic now. So if you ever wonder if an influence in your life is positive or negative, Stephen Hassan has some great work. And I think this would not be a proper episode without shouting him out at least, but I do think that his work deserves an episode of his own eventually, someday, somehow. But I just wanted to mention him because I don't think we did before, so sorry.
Okay, and I'm sorry. I was able to get this up. I'm just clicking everything but what we trying to do, y'all. I'm sorry. I'm just click. All right, here we go. So is this the one you were talking about, Emma?
Yes.
Okay, there we go.
So it was saying, like, in Germany, 1993, an expert on cults and world views from the Evangelical Lutheran Church stated that the educational target of the Jehovah's Witnesses is subordination by coercion and uncritical acceptance of the religion's doctrines and teachings in order to break the free will of the growing child and to mold it into an uncritical and dependent individual. The court found the child brought up with these views will probably be mentally harmed for the rest of his life. So,
Angela actually touched on childhood indoctrination, so this is really good. And so here's the next one here.
So then also in 1946, Gösta Rylander investigated a sample of conscientious objectors imprisoned in Sweden. About 4% of the eligible Swedish population was judged psychologically unfit for military service, and the corresponding figure for witnesses was 21%, or 5 times greater. And also in 1949, in the first study on American witness mental health, M.J. Pescoe, I'll say, diagnosed as being psychotic, over 7% of his total sample of 177 young males imprisoned due to obeying the Watchtower's prohibition against complying with military regulations. The level of witness psychosis in his sample was about 17 times higher than that for the population as a whole.
All right, and so we're going to move on to talk about some of the terms that you've heard in our program today. Before we do that, I actually want to show you guys the site. So let me try to do that. For those who might be on the line, and I want to show that you guys, even if you're familiar with Paul Grundy's site already, can you guys see this? If you're familiar with Paul Grundy's site already, he has a whole section on mental illness amongst Jehovah's Witnesses, and it is scholarly. He has references for everything. He has documents that you may not have seen. If you scroll all the way to the down, today I think we are going to talk about John Spencer, or may have already. You'll see, it talks about the disfellowshipping, Watchtower rules and regulations, how that's affected studies. This is the part right here. Studies in Jehovah's Witnesses and mental health. As you see here, these are scholarly articles here. I wanted to bring up this one here.
Can I just add in one point as well?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Right at the end of that article, he said, from a study of 102 cases, the mental illness rate of JWs is approximately 10 to 16 times higher than the rate for the general non-JW population.
That is high. And if you guys can remember from our clip earlier, that 10% he was saying that it was 10% of the congregation that were affected by mental health issues is what he counts in. So here's a scholarly work. It was in 1975. Remember that date? 1975, where John Spencer writes an article. If you want to look at his article about this, the mental health of Jehovah's Witnesses, he is extensive. He even goes into what we're actually going to go into, some of the figures more in depth, right, PJ?
Yeah.
Before we do that, let me actually switch gears here. Our application, y'all, is getting a workout today. So here it is, some of the terms that we've been talking about today. Complex PTSD, right? And I think, PJ, you were one of the panel members, talked about actually this being affected by complex PTSD, right?
Right. It's a stress disorder. It's a condition where you experience like the same symptoms as PTSD as if you went to war, but it's usually comes from when you've been abused as a child. And if you were born in the Jehovah's Witnesses, there was a lot of opportunities for you to be abused by your parents as a child in this organization. So there's a lot of people who suffer from CPTSD.
And then there is, is this the study that I believe, I guess this was out of order. Emma, this is the study you were referring to, right? And then there is hyperreligiosity. Before you go into religious trauma syndrome, which is actually very similar, PJ, hyperreligiosity is a psychiatric disturbance in which a person experiences intense religious beliefs or experiences that interfere with normal functioning. So it's not just you're just really excited about religion, or you're just hyper religious about religious. I say that because I didn't share my diagnosis earlier, but although my primary diagnosis is bipolar, I was actually diagnosed with hyper religiosity. When it says that it interferes with normal functioning, it doesn't even necessarily mean religious content. It can also be atheistic content, where a person is at work and they can't. I remember I would be at work. It was almost like I was a religious, just preoccupied to the point that it interfered with my work. I was constantly trying to study for the meetings. I was constantly trying to keep up and read all of the books. And then every time you feel like you read a book, then you go to the assembly, they come out with like 5 other books that you got to read throughout the year before you go around to the next one. You guys remember the treadmill. But what makes it even extra, where a psychiatrist will diagnose you with this, because they actually give you some type of, I don't, you guys, we have health people on the panel. Is it an MRI scan or a CT scan? I can't remember which one I had. And there is, they examine it. and based on, I'm not a doctor, but they, that's what they came up with. But it caused you to be almost irrational.
Mhm.
Um, these almost, and they specifically say that the behaviors and the thought distortions that you have is connected to cultic abuse. Now, when we think cultic abuse, we think ritualistic cultic abuse. It doesn't mean just that type of abuse. So hyper religiosity is a psychiatric diagnosis, y'all. Um, and religious trauma syndrome. PJ, you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's a function of both the chronic abuses and harmful religion and the impact of severing one's connection with your faith and the community that's surrounded with your faith. And it becomes a different
Mm,
thing when you're talking about a cult, because we all know if you were a Jehovah's Witness, you weren't allowed to have any kind of a social uh, anything outside of the religion. If it was outside of the religion, that was an acquaintance, that was not a friend, and you weren't allowed to make friends outside. So you lost everything. And they say it's compared to a combination of PTSD and complex PTSD, the stuff that you suffer from after being treated like that.
So these are very similar conditions, but very different. One is a syndrome. One is, I mean, not a syndrome, but one is a, extreme form of where, you know, how can I say this? It's extreme diagnosis. It's a more extreme version of religious trauma syndrome, because a person with hyper religiosity can also feel like they are hallucinating, and they see visions, and they see and if you're not, religious trauma syndrome doesn't necessarily mean that you have a um, condition in which you are hallucinating and feel like you're seeing visions, or God is talking to you and that sort of thing.
Mhm,
So the next slide we have is CPTSD.
mhm. It's caused by, like you see, severe repetitive abuse, whereas PTSD is usually from one huge traumatic incident that happened at one time. When you're talking about the complex PTSD, you're talking about stuff that happened over and over and over again. So you're talking about child abuse by
Hmm.
a parent, which, if you were to ask me, uh, just taking the children to the Kingdom Hall and letting them listen to people tell them how everybody in the world's going to be destroyed and we're going to see it, then they go home and have those nightmares. You're setting them up for this.
And all of us have experienced that. I think I touched on it earlier. I remember having nightmares, and Molly said the same thing.
Yeah,
All of us
I
do.
had,
But I remember when I was pregnant, I used to have, and I used to have, I for some reason, Jehovah Witnesses are obsessed with the Holocaust and Anne Frank, and I think they believe this is how the tribulation might be or something. And so they circulate stories, Holocaust stories, and stuff like this. And we talked about it obsessively in watchtowers and that sort of thing, because they pride themselves on, being conscientious objectors in that time. But I remember breaking down with my husband and my family. I would wake up when I was physically out but mentally in. I was away from the hall, but I would have a reoccurring dream of me being having to make this choice between God and my child in a worse way. Like, they may have threatened my child or whatever was going on in my nightmare. And as you're saying, PJ, it's exasperated, or I can never say that word, exacerbated,
Hmm.
you know, by our religion. Molly, you were beginning to say something?
yeah, so basically I had a very similar like dreams of just seeing people die, or being actually dreaming that I did not make it through Armageddon, and I dreamt about what the demons would be doing and all that stuff. So it was crazy. And I was like 6 when it started, and I had this one reoccurring night terror about seeing my loved ones die. And it was a crazy time. And about religious trauma syndrome, it's also a bit more specific. I read that basically when you have religious trauma syndrome, anything that reminds you of the religious environment that you grew up in or you were indoctrinated in can be a trigger, as well as you having a hard time socializing, because of course, as especially in cults, as Jehovah's Witnesses are and do, you are stripped of your social skills basically. And that's why so many of us don't know how to act and how to behave. And that is why I keep saying, before you try and help anyone, get your ass into a therapy session, because I don't need someone who did not go through the therapy and the hard work it takes internally and externally of going there, being there, taking the meds, ensuring a healthy diet, all the whole 9 yards of taking good care of your health and mental health, because they are related. I don't need a person who did not take those steps telling me how to do my thing.
That's good advice, Molly. So, PJ, we're going to go on to a study that was actually circulated throughout our community. You want to tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, this was a survey that Sally Peterson had put together for, I believe it was a college project. And I had shared it around in the community. I think Sharon had shared it around in the community too when it came out. Uh, it had all these questions like, have you experienced emotional, psychological problems as a result of being in the cult? And this is specifically about the Jehovah's Witnesses. And she got 1,000 responses. 96.7% said yes, they had experienced emotional and psychological problems. So there's your answer to how really bad the mental illness could be from this cult, and how many people really need to go seek help after leaving.
Right. Here's the PTSD here. It's social anxiety.
Mm-hmm. And the percentages are always overwhelmingly yes.
Do you have difficulty and suffer anxiety when going to unfamiliar places? This is an interesting one right here. That we were just talking about that.
Mm-hmm. See, once they left, the nightmares tended to get a little bit better. But when you're in, the nightmares are pretty much constant.
I forgot about the fact of checking the news and natural disasters as some sign that Armageddon is on its way. And are you currently being shunned? So if you go, we're gonna actually post this in here because it's really extensive. It has a lot of questions. Some of them you'll find that outside of mental health, some of these answers are questions to be interesting, and some of them the answers to be even more interesting. I think I saw those figures and I still was shocked. I mean, I think I thought I knew the answer, but that not the answer, but I knew that people would respond in that way, but not to that degree. So that was a really great survey. Go ahead, Sharon.
I believe the Vast Apostate Army website also is. I haven't looked at that in a while. I'm assuming it's still up and running. But anyways, they did a survey too that was really good. Right around the same time, actually. One thing I would like to mention, unless someone's going to mention it later, is about cognitive distortions. Is anyone covering that?
No, we haven't covered that.
Okay. So when I had my first nervous breakdown, I was hospitalized for a week in the psych ward. The first 3 days, I couldn't even speak. I probably could have, but I just I had no desire to speak. I just was limp. One thing that did help me to finally be able to speak was actually coloring. What do you call them? What do you call those real fancy designs? I can't think of mandalas.
Mhm. Mhm.
So they have, adult coloring books with those fancy designs. They're called mandalas. Get yourself some colored pencils. That actually takes your mind off of ruminating over the things we've been through, and it makes you focus on that, and it really makes a difference. But anyways, after I about a year after I got out of the hospital, I had gotten a copy of my medical report from when I was hospitalized. And of course, I was really offended that they said that I had magical thinking. And so, of course I had to look it up. And I'm not a psychology expert here, but roundabout, someone with magical thinking might say, well, this happened because this amazing thing happened because God did this or that, or I think X, Y, and Z. It's almost it's putting these anomalies together that don't really go together, and you think that by some miracle that da 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 da, and you live your life by these superstitious things that have happened. I'm not disregarding miracles for some people that profess to be Christian or whatever, but anyway, so there are some other things. There's a lot of cognitive distortions, and people that leave cults have a lot of those. And people that have addiction issues and codependent, they also have a lot of cognitive distortions upon leaving Jehovah's Witnesses. Another is black and white thinking, or tunnel vision, and a lot of these different distorted ways of looking at things create social anxiety. And I know I dropped out of school because I had social anxiety. Um, and I did go back and get my GED and did some college. So, yay me. But so, social anxiety is closely related to isolation. So, when we have all these distorted views of everything and we're socially isolating ourselves, we really truly need to seek a medical professional. And I have found that a good psychotherapist, a really good psychotherapist, is the best help that I've found that's available to help you work through those distortions. And then, of course, there's Bonnie Zeman. So,
Bonnie Zeman. Bonnie Zeman, I have a couple of her books. One is the Hillingham book, From Exiting the JW Cult. I chose that book because it gives you uh, talks about an afterlife after leaving the Jehovah's Witnesses. And so she has if you're on various stages of your recovery, and she has various different books. Um, and I love it because Sharon was actually talking about earlier how you reach out and to certain therapists or reach out to certain types of counseling, and they want to push Bible or push religion. Well, her books are specifically designed not to do that. So she just goes into it from a therapy perspective. I enjoyed the chapter that talked about when we leave religion, how you should be careful not to quickly adopt another belief system after leaving. Or she gives a lot of other different tips, and she also has a handbook for therapists, because sometimes as ex Jehovah Witnesses, it is hard to find therapists who are experienced in dealing with cults, and it's just can hang with you in the conversation when you're talking about your experience. I had I think I mentioned on a last Glass Table episode where I had a therapist who actually would fall asleep at sometimes because, on my cult
Right.
stories. So her handbook actually gives them, the therapist, information on how to deal with us. It is basically a handbook for them to be able to read about our experiences. Angela mentioned something really great earlier about how we have our own unique languages,
Yeah.
to be able to understand, uh, so that they can understand us, because there is nothing worse than opening yourself up in that very vulnerable way, and then you feel like the therapist is grasping at straws or not really reciprocating
Yeah.
the ex Jehovah Witness central care you need. And not all of them have to know ex Jehovah Witness and cult abuse. It's not, it's a very small specialty. Is we have to, seek them out.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, Bonnie Zima is a great resource, and she's in some of the groups. She's in support ex Jehovah Witness group, ran by Catherine. So if you guys want to reach out or talk to her, she also has a public page. She feel free to do that. And she was an ex Jehovah Witness too, obviously. So she knows exactly what we're going through when we walk into that threshold of a doctor's office.
Right. And also about substance and not pushing really religiosity. Mr. Atheist and Telltale always talk about how when they were dealing with substance abuse themselves, they both entered the 12 steps, and basically the guide at 12 steps was pushing, one of the steps is like admitting that there's a greater force than you or something like that. I don't know exactly because, first of all, we don't have 12 steps in Hungary. Second of all, I'm an atheist, so I'm like, okay, sure, greater force, universe, gravity, pick your, pick your poison. And basically, Telltale is writing a book, and he created a more expanded version of Stephen Hassan's bite model, and I can't wait to read that. In all honesty, so I just wanted to shout these two activists out, as well as Rachel. She's very open about how she has been dealing with suicidality, and how I just love how open these people are about their mental health struggles and the help they got and the medication they got and the experience that put them to that point where they got help and the position that they are in now. And I think that's so super important to know about. And as activists, I kind of feel like obliged to highlight and shed some light on that, because it's a hard knock life being an ex cult member.
Right. People don't know nothing about these ex Jehovah Witness streets, y'all. It's hard out here to be an ex Jehovah Witness. Y'all better ask somebody. Uh, Before we go, do anybody have any final thoughts on our episode, or because I don't want to leave anybody out? And I'm gonna go to the comments here. I see some colorful comments too. Kind of goes to what we were saying earlier about us pulling together. With all of us are going through something. All of us are going through things. I mean,
Mhm.
every last one of us. No one is exempt. If you're an ex Jehovah Witness, and what we're trying to do is just offer a service. We're offering you us, which is, I'm gonna keep it real. We don't have to do, because there's a lot of activists out here who get clout and leave, or there's a lot of activists or people who don't go into activism because they're triggered or they have issues, or there's some people that don't go into activism because it's hard being an activist, especially when if you're on a platform, where people see you publicly, all the time, and you guys are joining us every week. So I just like to say that we appreciate all of the feedback. We really do.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have? Oh,
Can
go
I?
ahead, Emma.
Can I just? Yeah, I would like to say here that people shouldn't judge people by the level of mental health issues they have. At the end of the day, mental health is mental health. It affects people in very different levels. So you shouldn't turn around to somebody and say they don't know shit about mental health just because they haven't been through exactly what you've been through.
Yeah, it's not a
And
competition, y'all.
yeah, exactly. And people don't always tell everything they've been through. I've
Yes.
spoke today about my mental health. I've not said half of the shit because, you know, some of it I find embarrassing. Some of it I will get emotional talking about. So I will say publicly what I feel is enough to help others. I don't need to go into depth about my mental health, but it doesn't mean that I don't know and I can't help others with mental health. It definitely does not mean that I'm a hypocrite.
And it doesn't mean that you haven't helped people, because a lot of these people who have things to say, why don't you get a platform?
Yeah.
Open a group. Talk to some of these people
Emma,
that we talk to on the phone late at night who are on the edge. Sometimes you walking them off the edge because they saying that they want to commit suicide. So before you judge, before you have something to say, be about this life first.
And yes, people don't always agree decisions that I'm going to say it now that I make in my group. I boot out abusive people to protect the other members. And if people feel that that's disfellowshipping, then that's their point of view. But they have got other groups to go to. If I expel people from my group, it doesn't expel them from the community. They have other groups. They still have friends. They're not being shunned. They're just not in a group that won't allow people to abusively harm members that have already been abused.
Yes, and I just like to say, y'all, it is at the end of the day, y'all, it's Facebook.
Yes.
It's Facebook. Go find another
And
group.
as one of Emma's moderators, at least she doesn't have a list of people that she discourages you. At least she doesn't have a running list of people that she spreads around to discourage you from talking to them.
If
Unlike
you know,
others.
and on that note, if you know, you know.
I would like to say just thank you, Emma, for all that you've done.
Yes, Emma.
And the one group that I do know, I mean, you do so much, I can't even follow all of it. But the one group that I am familiar with, you've helped people. You've made a platform separate from, ex Jehovah's Witnesses Unite, and it helps people that are facing physical issues, homelessness, joblessness, mental health problems. And like, you're one of my superhero activists. And so I just want to give a big thank you to you. And the last thing I want to say is that NAMI, which is NAMI, stands for National Alliance for Mental Illness. I thought they were only in the United States. They're actually in other countries as well.
Okay.
But they're predominantly in the United States. And they have support groups that you can attend in most cities. Most cities have a support group, and they meet once a week or every other week. And now with the quarantine, they're doing Zoom meetings. But it's really that extra support when you can't get into a counselor.
Right.
When your insurance hasn't went through yet, whatever, this is free. It's a free support group. But you can just Google that, NAMI, and I'm sure Spencer will put that phone number. There's an 800 national hotline number.
Right.
Yeah. And PJ, did you want to close us out today?
Yeah, I was going to talk about the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. The phone number for that is 1-800-273-8255.
Could you get that number to us one more time, Emma, just in case somebody missed it, like me? Sorry.
1-800-273-8255. And they have a website. It's www.suicidepreventionlifeline.org. If you're more comfortable chatting and text than speaking on the phone, they can talk to you through text message as well.
That's great. That's a great idea. I wish we had something similar
Thank
in
you.
Hungary. You have a suicide line, but I don't think you can text them, which would be very useful for those of us with social anxiety. Anyway, hopefully, eventually something like that will happen, and hopefully I will get to see that happen.
Yes,
In
because you're gonna be starting some activism in Hungary. You're gonna set the world on fire over there. So don't you worry about that. So here's the
oh
hotline. Do
yes,
I have
I'm
the
just
number
tired of
right?
from the loudest message.
Do I have the number right, PJ?
Yes.
800-273-8255.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to do this alone, people. You don't.
Hmm.
If you can't
Yeah.
go into a Facebook book group you trust or anywhere else, there are lots of other resources that you don't have to rely on us or any activists, for. And we're going to actually talk about that in an upcoming show. We thank you guys for joining us today. We thank our special guest today, Angela, for coming on to the program and giving us all of this great advice. I just want to give a special shout out to all the ones in the comments that we weren't able to get to today for opening yourselves up in such a way. We hope that our stories can impact you guys. As we always say, that if you have any comments, questions, or you just want to holler at us, you can do so with our Glass Table page. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel if you want to get notifications of when we're live next. And we thank you guys for joining us. And we're going to sign off now. And we will talk to you later in the Glass Table discussion group, not room. The Glass Table discussion group. We're going to continue the conversation there and in the comments. See you later.
Thank you for having us. Bye, everyone.
Bye.